every street that we turn on, memories come flooding back that are a little bit unexpected.
Breaking news, we've been reporting on it, but now it is official. Mark Pope is the new men's basketball coach at Kentucky.
There is nothing like the excitement going on right now here in Rupp Arena.
That name Kentucky is what he's all about.
And we are here, our job here, our assignment is to go win banners in the Final Four, win national championships. That's our job. Every coach in America, at every other job in America, stands up at the press conference and they try and moderate expectations. We don't do that here at Kentucky.
Mark Pope is going to lead you to greatness in every sense of the word.
A whole new era begins in Lexington for the Kentucky Wildcats. Mark Pope is now the head coach for Big Blue Nation.
It's the Kentucky season preview today on the Hoop Southbound Show.
You know, Maddie, I opened my door this morning. It was like nice and cool outside. The leaves are starting to fall from the trees. We had SEC Media Days on. There's a scrimmage as we're recording right now between North Carolina and Memphis going on for one of their exhibition matches. Basketball is on its way. It's right around the corner. It's right there. I mean, it's right. And today we're getting to talk about one of the biggest brands in the sport, the Kentucky Wildcats. I'm excited for what Kentucky has to offer this season. It's a whole new era. It's a whole different thing to talk about with Kentucky this season. Maddie, what are some of your initial thoughts on the Wildcats?
Yeah, I think it's going to be an interesting year. We come from, what feels like almost a lifetime of Coach Cal at Kentucky. You have a very familiar system. Fans are they know what he's going to do. They know what kind of players he's going to recruit. What kind of year he's going to produce for the most part. So I think this is the first year in a very long time that Kentucky fans are going to be puzzled. You got Mark Pope, a guy that's familiar with the program, but you've got a bunch of new guys that you're not familiar with. So it's going to be an interesting season, I think, for the team, for the fans, for everybody in the SEC, because usually Kentucky's one of those teams you mark on the calendar and you kind of dread as an opposing team.
Yeah, absolutely. So with Mark Pope, I was watching Big Blue Madness the other night, and what I found interesting is just how much he's embracing the Kentucky tradition. You said he was intimate with, familiar and intimate with the program. Yeah, I mean, he went so far back to bring Rick Pitino out in the court, his old coach that he won the 1996 championship with. And Rick Pitino was talking to that crowd and got him hyped up and everything else. Yeah, there's some Kentucky fans who still don't like Rick Pitino because he left for the NBA and then went to Louisville, but it was definitely an embrace of the past. But speaking of the past, let's talk about last season real fast. Last year, Kentucky finished tied for second in the SEC. They finished with a 23-10 record, 13-5 in the SEC, and they finished in the top 25 in KenPom at 23rd. However, they were eliminated in the first round of the NCAA tournament against Oakland and Jack Golke setting the world on fire from three-point land. And then, of course, John Calipari ends up leaving for Arkansas, and Kentucky ends up hiring Mark Pope, who we started out this conversation with today.
Definitely an interesting storyline as you go from the beginning of last season to the end. I think a lot of things that a lot of fans were not expecting. But, like I said, taking a look at the past, let's look at the year moving forward. Some of the storylines we're definitely going to be paying attention to this year is, will we find a new identity in Kentucky under Mark Pope? How different is it going to be from Coach Cal and kind of his era? We saw, Mark Pope coach at BYU. He's got a completely different style, so we're going to see a completely different Kentucky Wildcat team. And how are they going to get things back on track after the last 5 years? It's kind of been up and down. You're not used to seeing Kentucky's name kind of be out of the ring for a Final Four or title contender. So it'll be interesting to see this shift and see how Mark Pope tries to get their name back in, contention for being one of the best teams in the country. And also embracing the transfer portal and building a new modern identity for Kentucky. When you think, Coach Cal, his MO was to bring in freshmen, bring in all the talent that he can on the front end, have them stay for as long as possible. But we saw this year, obviously, Mark Pope came in and had virtually no team. So he had to get in the transfer portal and he got to work, which we'll talk about here in a little bit. And is Kentucky one of the most undervalued teams in the SEC? Like we mentioned, there's a lot of new things going on. So it'll be interesting to see how everybody is kind of evaluating this team moving forward. And then return to the Sweet 16. Are they going to be able to do that for the first time since 2019?
It's been a minute. It's been a minute since Kentucky has been back to the Sweet 16, and obviously that goes hand in hand with that 5 years you were talking about, where there was a standard pretty much set by Cal, and it hadn't been met in the last 5 years. I mean, it was really a Kentucky standard, but Cal had been so successful that it became an expectation for them to be in the Sweet 16. They just hadn't been there in a while. But for Mark Pope, for the people who aren't familiar with who Mark Pope is and why he was such a prominent candidate as it ended up being for the Kentucky job, let me give you a little bit of background on him. Pope was a very talented basketball player who started his career out with the Washington Huskies and was actually the Pac-10 Freshman of the Year back in 1992. He transferred to Kentucky during his junior season. Now, this is before the modern age of the portal, so he did have to sit out a season. But Pope ended up winning 2 SEC championships with Kentucky as a player and ended up being the team captain his senior season and also won a national championship there. He was coached by, of course, Rick Pitino, who we were talking about, who made his appearance on Big Blue Madness the other night. He was drafted to the NBA in the second round of the Indiana Pacers, and he played 6 seasons in the NBA before deciding to go to medical school, believe it or not. He ended up dropping out of medical school to become a basketball coach. He's been an assistant coach for Georgia, Wake Forest, and BYU. He got his first head coaching job at Utah Valley and then became the coach at BYU. He has been to the NCAA tournament twice. And this is the confusing thing on his resume, where it doesn't kind of look like a Kentucky coach. He is yet to win an NCAA tournament game, actually. He has a unique offensive style, and his team is very modern in its approach. It forces defenders to choose between guarding driving lanes or three-point shots. It's been described as a video game style of offense before. We even heard today in SEC Media Days, kind of described as an European style of basketball by Bruce Pearl. The concepts require that all players 1 through 5 are able to shoot a 3 at some efficiency. Last season, if you watched our March Madness episode, you may have noticed that we had BYU on our big board in the lowest category, the high ceiling, low floor group of the teams. The main reason we liked BYU so much was that this team checked a lot of boxes that indicated a team with the potential to make a run in the tournament. For whatever reason, mainly a slow start against Duquesne last season, BYU didn't get off in running, but they were a capable team that shot 34.8% from 3 and had decent metrics. That BYU team shot less 3-point field goals made than their season average in that game against Duquesne, and the team shot a lower percentage from 3 than their season average, and even worse in the second half. What I'm saying is Mark Pope is a very intriguing hire. Kentucky might be getting in on the ground floor of something that's got high potential, a coach who's capable of putting together high-level teams. He's X's and O's. It's a really good hire. Pope just doesn't have the banners and the championships that you would expect on a Kentucky coach's resume. Mark Pope reminds me of a successful company who's taking a big risk here for Kentucky's sake. Microsoft, for example. Very successful computer company, very successful business, but they took a huge risk in 2001 getting into the gaming industry, one that Sony and Nintendo had cornered off. So they made a brand new, unproven gaming console, and today Xbox is one of the biggest brands in video games and was become an industry grown by 14%. With Mark Pope's style, it's much more similar to a lot of the coaches that we're seeing right now who are analytics driven and modern style of basketball driven, and we see coaches in the SEC kind of adopting these philosophies at Florida and Alabama under Nate Oates. Kentucky's taking on a smart coach with a great game plan that could pay off huge for the next generation of basketball. Getting Pope more assets and ability to recruit more talented players could pay off potentially huge for Kentucky.
Yeah, I mean, we kind of mentioned earlier the differences that we're going to see in this Kentucky team now that Coach Cal stepped down. We personally gave him a lot of grief last season
Yes,
for not adopting some of those things. So it'll be interesting to see how Mark Pope's style kind of rounds out Kentucky and lets us see what it's going to turn into.
Yeah, oh, certainly. It's going to be a very, very different era, and you're going to see a very different style of player brought in, one that fits the game plan a little bit more than just going straight for the talent. So let's go ahead and turn to those players, actually, and players that you need to know on this Kentucky team.
Yeah, a big one is Jackson Robinson. Robinson's a player who is definitely already familiar with the SEC. In the 2021 season, he played for Texas A&M. From 21 to 22, he played for Arkansas, but he spent his 2 previous years at BYU with Mark Pope. He saw a major boost in playing time after getting to BYU, and his performance vastly improved along with those minutes. Last season, Jackson Robinson averaged 14.2 points per game at 2.5 boards, 1.3 assists, and shot 42.6% from the field. He also sat right under that magic number of 36% from three at 35.4. We talked about watching SEC Media Day today, and at SEC Media Day, Coach Pope spoke super highly of Jackson, saying he's an extraordinary leader, that he has clear ability to shoot the ball, and his length makes him a multifaceted player. So I think he's going to be a well-rounded player who's going to lead this team very well.
He was a huge piece for BYU last year, and you're right. He does have a clear ability to shoot the ball. But another player who's got a clear ability to shoot the ball is Kobe Brea, who transferred in from Dayton. This kid can shoot, man. I mean, just flat out can make anything. He was 49.8% from three last season. As a matter of fact, I believe it was said, they'll have to double check the numbers, but if he had taken two less three-pointers, he would have shot 50% from three last season. He can make it with a hand in his face, being contested, whatever. He's a great basketball player and one of the most lethal shooters coming out of the portal this season. He averaged 11.1 points per game for Dayton last year. He's very experienced as a graduate transfer, and that Dayton team was a very good team last year, too. He wasn't just the only player on that team. They had some guys like Holmes who ended up going to the NBA as well. So he's going to be a key piece for how this offense functions under Mark Pope, especially that three-point shooting ability. It's very important for Mark Pope's offensive style.
Yeah, and then, we've talked kind of more about the backcourt, but let's move to the front court. If you got a backcourt or a front court player who can score 1,000 points, get over 500 rebounds, and over 100 blocks, that sounds like a solid resume to
It
me.
does indeed.
And Andrew Carr is going to do just that on this Kentucky roster. He's adding that experience over his last 4 years. This is his last season of eligibility. But the Wildcats, I'm assuming, are hoping that this powerhouse forward excels and adds a much needed gain to this front court. Last season at Wake Forest, Carr averaged 13.5 points per game, 6.8 boards, and 1.5 assists. He shot 52.6% from the field, and he's an average three-point shooter, which is exactly what Mark Pope is looking for from, like you said, from spots 1 through 5 on the field.
Yeah, and as a four, he's likely going to be the four, might play some five in the mix as well. But yeah, excellent shooter. Not a ton of volume, but I mean, really don't need it. 37.1%. That's someone that fits the style here altogether all too well. Let's talk about the rest of this roster, though. There's a lot of talented pieces on this team. There's a lot of good players on this team. When you talk about the backcourt, you're talking about Lamont Butler, who's a very good defender and an excellent point guard. You're also talking about Kirk Rasai, who's another excellent guard who's got some big game experience coming from Arizona and West Virginia in his career. Another good player there in the backcourt. But with the front court, Maddie, we talked about this a little bit in our top 5 front court episode. I'm concerned about the 5 position, and the only reason is that he got 2 excellent portal additions, and Amari Williams and Brandon Garrison, both extremely talented basketball players and guys who can get the job done on any other given team. But these guys aren't necessarily the Mark Pope style of 5 that you want to see. You talk about Waterman for BYU last year. That was a guy who shot around, I believe it was 2.5 3-point field goals attempts per game. Brandon Garrison has never attempted a 3 in a college basketball game, and Amari Williams shot 3 total for the entire season last year while he was at Drexel. So it's interesting. I don't know how it's going to necessarily work if Pope's planning on changing his offensive style to fit these kids, or if his plan is that he can get them to shoot, or it's something else that I'm just not seeing. But that's probably one of my biggest question marks on this roster is how the five spot's going to function for this team. Maddie, any thoughts on what you're seeing on this roster?
Yeah, I mean, really, the only thing I can think is that, obviously these guys have worked out. They've had some time to work on Mark Pope's style of offense. Um, so maybe they're just shooters who, in a traditional role, fours will shoot threes a little bit more than fives, but it's rare that you see a five pull it from behind the 3-point line. So maybe they're just, you know, uh kind of a dark horse in the 3-point race. So we'll see. But like I said, a little bit hesitant at how this front court is going to work with his offensive style.
Yeah, it's the most interesting part. 1 through 4, I'm not concerned. Like that fits 1 through 4. And even if you have Andrew Carr at the 5, at times, who's going to back him up is kind of the question to continue that offensive surge that you could keep going. When we ran our whiteboard model for Kentucky earlier in the offseason, back during the transfer portal time, we ran that model without using Amari Williams as that, with the ball in his hands. So we saw how effective it could be with Andrew Carr running the 4 spot. But then again, like I said, on that offensive scheme, it has to be able to work as a mirror image as well. So I'm curious how that 5 spot's going to work. That's, like I said, the biggest concern I have. Possibly, possibly the biggest thing that you're going to be doing is a lot of offensive rebounds. It's going to be great defense, and maybe we just don't see the offensive production that we got to accustomed to seeing out of the 5 spot at BYU at Kentucky under year one. That's another point of emphasis. It's year one. Not every roster is going to be perfect when in year one for a coach. But yeah, it's something to be curious about. Let's go ahead and turn the indexes real fast when we look at this team. So, for those of you who don't know what's going on, there's some things that we look at. To get a feel for how good a team or how well constructed a roster is and how high their potential is. The first part of this is based on Evan Mia's research that he conducted this offseason in order to build the best roster possible. And there were 3 areas he was looking at. He was looking at talent, and he was looking at playing time retention and second-year players in your system for your team. For Kentucky, they're talented. The recruiting class came in at number 45, which isn't the big bright spot for this, but they have the number 5 transfer class here in Mark Pope's first year. So a lot of talented players coming off this, like Atego Away and several others who are more than capable scorers and good basketball players. Lamont Butler's another example. Kirk Sky. We've named a lot of these guys on this roster so far. Very, very good team. Where we get into this is clearly a first year coach situation is the playing time retention. Only one player coming from BYU, and that's Jackson Robinson, and he averaged 26.5 minutes per game, which is good. But like I said, there's nothing else. And for the second year players in the system, it's just Jackson Robinson. So there's not a lot of pull coming from that BYU team for guys who have played in the system before. And for Evan Mian, based on his research that he conducted, this would be a concern. And I do think it is a little bit of a team needs to come together and gel kind of thing here for Kentucky. So let's go ahead and let's see if it gels, just how high the ceiling can be for Kentucky, because that's a different topic. And for this, we're looking for the Champions Index. This is based on a lot of things that gamblers are looking at for teams when they're trying to find a team that's going to make a deep run in March. You're looking for upperclassmen scorers. You're looking for 2 out of your 3 top scorers to be upperclassmen. This team is very upperclassmen heavy, and I don't think there's going to be a problem there. Now, one of your top 3 guys, based on the numbers from last year, is Ainsley Allamore. I don't know necessarily if he's going to be up there on this group, but there's a lot of upperclassmen on this roster to take his place. But your top 3, based on last year's numbers, would be Jackson Robinson, Allamore, and Andrew Carr. Then you're looking for a team that shoots that magic number, 36% from 3 or better. Now, if you look at the players who played college basketball last year, and you totaled up their numbers, you're looking at a team that shot 38.8% from 3 last season for the guys, transfers and everything, who shot, played basketball a year of college basketball under there. Loaded team of shooters. Away, Brea, Crisai, Allamore, all guys who shot over 36% from 3. Maddie, you did your preview on Jackson Robinson. Good shooter. One of the better things here for Kentucky. Now, you are also looking for a top 40 Kim Pom defense. Now, BYU last year came in 60th in Kim Pom, and Mark Pope has only met this threshold once as a coach at BYU. All his other teams have been outside the top 50 defenses. To me, this is the biggest limiting factor for how high Kentucky's ceiling is going to be that defense. Now, they've got some good defenders, though. You got Andrew Carr, who was blocked shots like crazy and has played very good defensive minutes. Tago Away, who was one of the best defenders on Oklahoma last season. Lamont Butler, who has also gotten, I believe it was all Mountain West Conference Defender of the Year. So you got good defenders on this team, and you're trying to raise that level of defense. Mari Williams can block shots as well. So you got guys who can play defense on this team. It's going to be a matter of making sure they're not left hung out to dry in transition from this offensive style and making sure you're getting the best potential that you possibly can for this team. But that's the look at the indexes. And yeah, that Champions Index looks really, really good for Kentucky if this team can come together. That's going to be the factor. Can this roster come together?
And we're going to see if this roster can come together once we get basketball started. So let's take a look at the schedule. And Kentucky starts the season off with a semi-decent mid-major team at Wright State at home in Lexington. They will then follow that up at home against Bucknell. Then Kentucky gets their first big test of the season in the Champions Classic, where they will face the Duke Blue Devils.
Yeah, huge game here. So Duke had four big transfer, and Brown, Gillis, James, and Sheffield all coming from the portal to this team. Solid players. Then you've also got, if you haven't heard, these phenomenal freshmen. Cooper Flagg, his name's all over the place in college basketball. He's going to be one of the big storylines in college basketball this season. A lot of coaches outside of Duke praising him and thinking that he's going to be one of the best players in the country. And then you got Evans and Nugaba, I believe is how you pronounce that, and Darren Harris as well for this Duke team. This team's loaded. It's a very talented team. It's going to be youth is going to be kind of the limiting factor for Duke, and we're going to see how it plays out in that Champions Classic. Interesting matchup here of this brand new transfer team versus this very young Duke team that's phenomenally talented. So that's going to be a very interesting game there.
Yeah, for sure. It'll be one that I think everybody is going to have eyes on in the world of college basketball.
Absolutely. It's going to be one of the best ways to start the season possible.
Yeah, we'll see if it ends up being the best way or one of the worst ways for this Kentucky team. Either way, you got to get on, keep moving. So after that, they will play a string of mid-majors. They'll play Lipscomb, Jackson State, Western Kentucky, and Georgia State. Then they are off to the ACC SEC Challenge on the road against Clemson.
Yeah, new look Clemson team. They're getting some praise all over the place where they might end up in the ACC this season. Big thing here is PJ Hall is no longer with Clemson. And then they also lost RJ Godfrey, who jumped in the transfer portal and decided he was going to play for Georgia. RJ Godfrey was supposed to get a lot of the minutes that PJ Hall had. But for Clemson, they got some players to watch out for on this team. You got Hunter, who's a very good player who's coming back. Chase Hunter, he was the most improved player. And then you had Ian Sheffield as well coming back for Clemson. He was kind of the Batman or the Robin to PJ Hall's Batman for Clemson last season, if you will. So this is a good team. They're also bringing in the number 20 freshman in the country and Dallas Thomas as well to this Clemson team. So this is a fun matchup for the ACC SEC Challenge here on an early night of the season.
Yeah, I think it'll be good. Good kind of two unproven teams, see what they're about. I think it'll be a good matchup for the ACC SEC Challenge. But a few days later, Kentucky will hop on a plane and travel across the country to face Mark Few and Gonzaga.
Yeah, Gonzaga is bringing back a few players that you might have heard of, like Nimhard. They're starting off with a group of returners like Graham Ike also, or I forget how to pronounce it. It looks like Ike to me every time, and I know I'm mispronouncing it. But 17 points per game. What?
I think it's EK.
EK, thank you, Graham EK. 17 points per game, 7 rebounds per game. They're also going to bring it back. Ben Gregg at 9 points per game and 6 rebounds, and Brandon Huff at 9 points a game. They're returning all three guards from their primary rotation from last season, including Nolan Hickman. This team seems to be a pretty decent one. I know they're going to be projected number one in the WCC. Interesting storyline going on for Gonzaga this offseason is that they're looking to join the new Pac-12 for the years to come. But I mean, obviously, I think everybody anticipated Gonzaga being picked number one in the West Coast Conference this season. But yeah, that's going to be a great matchup and a huge opportunity.
Definitely. The Wildcats will then get Colgate at home, and then they will face rival Louisville, who also has a new coach taking over their program.
Yeah, Pat Kelsey coming in, replacing Kenny Payne this offseason. He's the new coach, came in from Charleston. He's been very, very successful at Charleston the last couple of years, made the NCAA tournament last year. Pat Kelsey's got some guys who are going to be able to make some contribution to this team. Terrence Edward Jr. Coming from James Madison, very, very good player. Pryor is another one who's coming in who averaged 13 points per game and nearly 8 rebounds a night, and nearly close, getting close up there to 1.5 steals per game. This is a decent Louisville team with a chance to get themselves right, if you will, because things have not been good at Louisville under the Kenny Payne era. But this seems to be a return a little bit more to normalcy, if you will, for the Cardinals. So this is going to be a huge matchup there to get this rivalry and new chapter really in this rivalry underway.
There will be very little rest in this non-conference schedule for the Wildcats. They are then headed to New York to play in Madison Square Garden in the CBS Sports Classic. This year, they will face off against Ohio State.
Yeah, this is going to be a good one. And honestly, it's because it's another team we don't have a full grasp on. There's a lot of hype of talking about Ohio State and talking them up this offseason, but the truth is, no one really knows how good Ohio State's going to be under a new coach and how things are going to work out. Now, for you SEC fans out there, there's going to be some names that you're familiar with, like especially for Kentucky fans, and Aaron Bradshaw, who's going to be playing for this Ohio State team, just under 5 points per game and 3.3 rebounds a night. And then also from South Carolina, you're going to have Michi Johnson out there who averaged over 14 points per game and got 4 rebounds a night for Lamont Paris in South Carolina. And then also Sean Stewart's going to be joining this Ohio State team as well. They got Thornton back, Royal back, and McAfee back, or Maffei back for Ohio State. So this is going to be a team that we just don't know exactly how good they're going to be, but they look to be promising in the Big Ten this season.
Definitely so. The Wildcats will then wrap up the non-conference schedule against Brown at home in Rupp. So, David, we've gone through the non-conference. You've seen some beasts of teams that they're going to have to face, and then some that, may help build some camaraderie in this team. Overall, what are your thoughts on this non-conference schedule?
I think this is a good one. This is definitely a tough slate of games. You got plenty of opportunities for Q1, Q2 opportunities in this. I think this is one of the better schedules we've seen so far as its difficulty goes, and one you could build a resume around. So I like this setup a lot for Kentucky and the opportunity it presents to build a resume for this team. So I'm liking what I'm seeing here for the Wildcats. Let's go ahead and go to the SEC schedule. Kentucky will get Florida, Texas A&M, Arkansas, South Carolina, Auburn, and LSU at home. For their away games, they'll get Georgia, Mississippi State, Ole Miss, Texas, Oklahoma, and Missouri. And then for their home and homes, they'll get Alabama, Vanderbilt, and Tennessee. Maddie, thoughts on the conference schedule?
I mean, this is a tough conference schedule. Thankfully, you get some of the better teams at home, your away schedule on the road. You've got some teams that we're kind of putting in the middle of the pack here. So, maybe pull away with an upset, get some extra points in the net. But the home and home series, you got one that people may consider a cakewalk, but then you've got Alabama and Tennessee. That's going to be rough.
That is an extremely tough home and home schedule there. I know Vanderbilt's in the mix there, and they're projected toward the bottom of the conference. But you're right that Alabama and Tennessee is your home and homes. Those are great. Those are absolutely great. And then let's just get the elephant out of the room. When Arkansas comes to Rupp, it's going to be a big deal. If you haven't heard, it's a big deal because some coach is showing up in Rupp Arena. who's
I'm
kind of
still so disappointed they didn't do Arkansas, Kentucky home and home
that should
series.
have been the home and home. It should have been. That would have been a great one. But I'm glad we get the game in Rupp because that's going to be huge for the fans there in
Mhm.
Lexington. All right, Maddie, let's go ahead and turn to our expectations here. What are your thoughts on the Wildcats?
So I've got the Wildcats going 19 and 12 on the season. I have high hopes for this new Kentucky system. I think we'll see some fumbles just because we do have a first year coach in the SEC, trying to get comfortable and a team that's trying to gel. But there's a lot of talent on the sidelines, and there's going to be a lot of talent on the court. I've got them as my number 5 in my preseason projection, but I think that is probably their ceiling. I think we could really see them anywhere from 5 to, if things don't work out, maybe to 9 or 10.
I agree with you on you got the floor there. I'm surprised you have a 19 and 12 team as your number 5 team in the conference. Is that based on the difficulty of the non-conference schedule, and you think it might take a minute for this team to click?
Yeah, I'm thinking, you've got one of the toughest games. You got Duke almost right off the bat. If this team hasn't gelled, if they haven't figured out the system, even though that is a good team, that could kind of lead to, in my thoughts, a domino effect. And we may see, some of those more difficult things. But like we said, you've got some rough teams coming into home. You got Arkansas, you got A&M, you got Florida. I think South Carolina is going to be a decent team. You got Auburn, it's going to be one of the best teams in the SEC. It's going to hurt your net score if you drop one of those games at home. So, I think there's a couple in there that they're not really supposed to lose that they might drop. But I do think that they're going to win some games that get them up higher in the net.
Okay, so you're saying that you think it's going to be good in conference. Non-conference might be a shaky start. I can get behind that thought process just a little bit. I've got Kentucky 20 and 11. Had had a lot of they'll win this one, lose this one here, take one of the two here when I was going through their schedule. Team has a pretty high ceiling in my opinion. I think it's higher than what you're thinking it is, and I think it's got a chance to rise depending if they've got a run in them or two during the course of the season. I think the number should be somewhere around 20 and a half, 21, somewhere around there. I was listening to Eye on College Basketball today, and Matt Norlander had Kentucky as the number 2 team in the SEC, whereas Gary Parrish had them down at number 7. And honestly, I can see both those things happening. Like I can see both outcomes happening. I think Kentucky can hit that number 2 spot in the SEC. I think that's a possibility. I think they can also finish as low as 8-9. So I think there's a wide range, and there's a lot of teams like that in this conference this year. That's just because based on how deep this conference is, and for a first year coach bringing in a completely transfer class team, that's going to be a little bit rougher. So I do think that the opportunity to gel and click is going to matter early on, and especially when you got hard games at the beginning. You were talking about Duke and Gonzaga. Those are good teams with good coaches, and those are going to be some difficult situations that Kentucky's going to be put in. But like I said, I got them 2011th, and I've got them currently sitting as my number 7 team in the SEC. I believe I got them number 7. Let me double check that to make sure I'm not crazy here. Yeah, I've got them sitting as my number 7 team in the SEC, and that was a hard spot for me to finally just say I think they're going to finish 7th. I may be again where we've got them. You've got them 5. I got them 7. Again, there's a wide spectrum where this team can finish up, and I truly believe that they could finish. They could shock us, or they could end up in the mid-tier section of the SEC. But overall, I think it's a good team. It's just where does your confidence at? And said I built a lot of this of my polls this preseason off of confidence in the team and my thought process there. And for me, not having that answer at that 5 spot was a big concern. And then not knowing how good the defense actually would be for Kentucky is another concern I have. So I'm kind of buying a little bit lower, if you will, is where I'm at
Yeah.
with it.
I mean, if anybody is watching that hasn't been keeping up, I am almost doing like a blind ranking style with my preseason poll, so I feel like it's going to be completely different by the time season actually starts.
Mm-hmm.
Um, in my current polls, they were either number 5 or number, I believe, 11 or 12. So
I'm glad you made that Ole Miss is where that's starting to lean now as far as your pick goes, because I was going to get real concerned if you were going to pick Kentucky that low. Like I was like, I don't know about that. I don't think that. I think that's below the floor I've even projected them at. I do think the floor is a little bit lower for Ole Miss, so like I'm glad you're starting to lean that way and not the other way that this could go. All right, guys, if you have not already, please like and subscribe to the Hoop Southbound Show. We greatly appreciate it. We've got more content coming out. We did an episode on Kentucky's portal class, and we also did a breakdown on Mark Pope's offense. So look for those videos on our channel. We're going to be talking more Kentucky basketball as the season goes on. So keep it right here. Please like and subscribe, and we're glad to have you guys here. How do you guys think Kentucky's going to do this season? Please drop it down in the comment section. I'm sure I'll get nothing but Kentucky fans talking about this and not members of my own fan base telling them that they're going to finish last in the SEC this season. I'm sure that's not going to happen at all. Not a chance. Not a chance my alma mater gets in this comment section right now. But yeah, you guys, if you haven't already, please like and subscribe to the show, and we'd love to have you here throughout the course of the season. Until next time, see you soon.
Thanks, guys. Have a great week.